One day, they were expelled. Their lands seized. But now, Zimbabwe, a country in ruins, wants its white farmers back. How does a country reach such a point? And what does this turnaround reveal about Africa's future? Get ready for a story of catastrophic mistakes and the painful search for a second chance. The promise that became a nightmare, Zimbabwe's land reform. To understand why Zimbabwe reached this point, we need to go back to the early 2000s. The country, then known as the breadbasket of Africa, was one of the continent's largest grain exporters, thanks in large part to its 4,500 white farmers. They owned most of the fertile land, a legacy of the British colonial era, but were also responsible for over 70% of agricultural production and employed hundreds of thousands of black Zimbabweans. Under the leadership of Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe's government launched a fast-track and forced land reform program. The idea was to correct historical injustices by redistributing the land from white farmers to the black population. The promise was empowerment and equity. In practice, it was a disaster. Farms were invaded, white farmers were often violently expelled, without adequate compensation. The land was largely distributed to Mugabe's political allies and military officials, many of whom lacked experience in large-scale agriculture or access to capital and infrastructure. The domino effect, economic collapse and humanitarian crisis. The result of the land reform was catastrophic and immediate. Zimbabwe's agricultural production, which was the backbone of its economy, plummeted. Without the expertise, capital, machinery, and infrastructure of commercial farmers, the farms became unproductive. Crops dwindled, exports vanished. The local currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, entered an unprecedented hyperinflationary spiral, where money lost value every hour. Supermarkets were empty, jobs were lost en masse. Zimbabwe, from being a food exporter, transformed into a country dependent on international food aid to prevent widespread starvation. Basic infrastructure, like health and education, collapsed. The dream of empowerment turned into a nightmare of poverty and misery for the majority of the population, including many of the black people who were supposed to have benefited. The main lesson was clear: land without expertise and capital does not generate wealth. The painful recognition: why do they want them back? Facing a shattered economy, Mugabe was deposed in 2017, and his successor, Emmerson Mnangagwa, inherited a devastated country. It is in this context that the surprising proposal to bring back white farmers, or at least compensate them and encourage them to return or invest, emerges. The decision isn't ideological, but purely pragmatic. The government recognized that the agricultural expertise and capital of the former commercial farmers are essential to reactivate the agricultural sector and, consequently, the economy as a whole. They possess the know-how to operate large-scale farms, master specific cultivation techniques for the Zimbabwean climate, and access international markets and financing. In 2020, the government signed a $3.5 billion compensation agreement with displaced white farmers, a tacit acknowledgement of the mistake made and a gesture to try and restore trust. Although many have already settled in other African countries, like Zambia and Mozambique, and the compensation is symbolic for the scale of the loss, the peace overture and the search for expertise are clear. The challenges of return and lost trust. The idea of bringing white farmers back faces enormous challenges. First, trust is broken. Many farmers suffered severe trauma and lost everything. The risk of a new cycle of expropriations, should the political climate change, is a real concern. Without robust guarantees of property rights and security, few would be willing to reinvest their resources and lives in Zimbabwe. Second, the land issue remains sensitive. Redistribution has been done, and taking land from those who received it now to return it to former owners is politically explosive and complex. The government needs to strike a balance between attracting expertise and avoiding new dispossessions. Third, the country's infrastructure is in ruins. Roads, electricity, water, access to financing and markets, all of this needs to be rebuilt for commercial agriculture to be viable again. Despite the obstacles, there is growing recognition that the experience and investment of these farmers are crucial. Some are returning in partnership with new landowners, or in consultancy projects, bringing back the lost knowledge. It's a slow, painful, and uncertain process, but one that demonstrates desperate pragmatism in the face of an economic disaster. Zimbabwe's story serves as a brutal warning about the consequences of poorly planned and ideologically motivated land policies. The pursuit of historical justice without a sustainable plan for productivity can lead to economic ruin and widespread suffering. The plea for white farmers to return is not just a call for help, but a bitter acknowledgement that real progress requires more than just good intentions. It requires knowledge, stability, and trust. Do you believe Zimbabwe will be able to recover with this strategy? Let me know in the comments.